The vastness of space stretched endlessly before the eyes of the Kraken Alliance fleet as they gathered their forces for what they believed would be the final blow against humanity. The coalition of 7 species had assembled, the largest offensive fleet the galaxy had ever seen. 10,000 ships bristling with every form of military technology imaginable. The insectoid Vakai had sent their sleek and deadly hunters, while the massive Dandri city ships loomed like floating fortresses alongside. The crystalline battle platforms of the Zenith Collective. It was a show of overwhelming force intended to crush the humans quickly and decisively. On the command deck of the flagship, Inexorable Judgment Admiral Thuler stood with his 4 arms folded behind his back, studying the tactical readouts with a practiced intensity. His blue skin glowed faintly under the illumination of countless displays, feeding him real-time data, fleet formations, weapons, readiness, approach vectors. Everything was being monitored meticulously to ensure the operation went flawlessly. Beside him, First Strategist Mex Lauren provided constant updates, their compound eyes flickering with streams of incoming information. The humans have been informed of our approach. Vexer asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. The strategist nodded. Yes, Admiral, their defensive fleets are mobilizing, but intelligence suggests they have fewer than 300 warships. Our projections indicate we will achieve orbital superiority within 6 standard cycles. Vuler's mouth tentacles twitched in satisfaction. The humans had been a persistent thorn in the side of the Kraken Directorate for too long. Their rapid territorial expansion, their knack for forming alliances with vulnerable species, and their disruptive influence on the delicate balance of galactic power had made them a target. Their technological advancement was worrying their adaptability even more so. Better to crush them now before they evolved into an unstoppable threat. Sir, called the communications officer, her scales shimmering nervously. We are detecting a single vessel approaching from human territory. Admiral Thuler turned sharply. A single vessel, not a fleet. Confirmed, sir. Just one ship, small, barely armed, according to our scans. A ripple of amusement spread across the command deck. Was this some kind of joke, a last desperate act of defiance, perhaps a symbolic surrender mission? The arrogance of humanity never ceased to amaze. The Kraken leadership tactical displays shifted to focus on the approaching vessel. It was gunmetal gray, sleek but unassuming, with few visible weapon emplacements. It was perhaps 1/10 the size of the Inexorable Judgment and bore the insignia of the Terran Confederacy, a stylized Earth surrounded by stars. Second Strategist Carr let out a hissing laugh, expanding the ridges on his crest. Perhaps they wished to surrender personally. Admiral Thuler could not shake a growing sense of unease. Something about the human vessel was wrong. It was. Approaching too confidently, Magnify, he ordered, and a full analysis of the ship appeared. The design matched that of a diplomatic cruiser class, according to Alliance intelligence. Yet something about its bearing felt deliberate, predatory. They are transmitting, sir, the communications officer said. They are requesting direct communication with Fleet Command. Thuler considered his options. Accept the transmission, he said curtly. Let us hear what pitiful terms they offer. The main view screen flickered and was replaced by the image of a human woman, dark-skinned with close-cropped hair and eyes that seemed to pierce through the screen. Commander Sarah Chen, she introduced herself, speaking through a universal translator. Admiral Thuler, she said, I am Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Confederacy vessel. Dialogue, I thank you for accepting this communication. Thuler gave a disdainful ripple of his mouth tentacles. Commander Chen, you approach an invasion fleet with a single ship. I assume you bring terms of surrender from your government. Chen remained calm, composed, and unshaken. No, Admiral, I bring an opportunity. a chance for you to withdraw your fleet and avoid catastrophic losses." Laughter erupted across the bridge. Even Thuler allowed himself a rare, gurgling chuckle. The idea that a single human ship could threaten the combined might of 7 civilizations was beyond absurd. "Perhaps your translator is malfunctioning," he said. "You face 10,000 ships against your one vessel. What possible leverage do you think you have?" Chen nodded as if she had anticipated this reaction. "We have been aware of your coalition building for quite some time. Admiral," she said, "we have monitored your fleet movements, your weapons development, your strategic planning. We allowed it to proceed because we needed to understand the full scope of the threat aloud." Thuler echoed with growing unease. "You speak as though you had a choice in the matter." "We did," Chen answered calmly. "Just as we have a choice now, I am authorized to demonstrate why challenging Earth would be a catastrophic mistake." With that, she appeared to activate something off-screen and instructed them to observe their tactical display. Particularly Sector 912 Vuler's compound eyes shifted immediately to the holographic map. The sector contained a wing of Vakai destroyers, 300 ships positioned as the vanguard of the fleet. Without warning, explosions began to bloom across the display. Dozens of ships erupted into fireballs, alarms blared. Across the bridge, tactical officers shouted reports, but the destruction was already spreading. 57 vessels were destroyed within moments, and more were showing critical failures across all systems. Chen spoke again, her voice steady. Those ships used a quantum drive design with a critical vulnerability in the containment field generators. When subjected to specific subspace frequency manipulations, they fail catastrophically. Thuler was stunned. His mind raced. The Vakai prided themselves on independent development. Yet here a human commander revealed that they had orchestrated a massive covert sabotage operation from within. Even more explosions rippled through the fleet as panic spread among the coalition commanders. The humans had demonstrated without firing a single weapon that they could tear the most powerful fleet in galactic history apart at will. Chen leaned forward slightly. "This is merely a demonstration," she said. "Every vessel in your fleet has similar vulnerabilities known to us. Some are hardware-based, some are software exploits, some are based on your own misunderstandings of fundamental physics principles. We could continue this demonstration, but I think the point is made." Admiral Thuler stared at the tactical display as the number of crippled ships continued to rise. The mighty invasion force they had so carefully assembled was unraveling faster than he could comprehend, and the realization struck him with terrifying clarity. They had vastly underestimated humanity. An entire command deck of the inexorable judgment pulsed with a mixture of confusion and barely suppressed laughter as the tactical displays confirmed what the sensors were reporting: a single human vessel approaching at sublight speed. It was almost insulting after the magnitude of the fleet the Kraken Alliance had assembled. Admiral Thuler stared hard at the visuals projected before him. The ship was small, barely a speck compared to the massive hulls surrounding it. Its silhouette, sleek and minimalist, shimmered against the backdrop of the stars, its hull colored in muted gunmetal gray. The markings on the side were unmistakable, the stylized Earth surrounded by a circle of stars, the insignia of the Terran Confederacy. The ship was designated Dialogue, a name that suggested diplomacy rather than aggression, adding another layer of absurdity to the unfolding situation. The Kraken officers exchanged amused glances, some barely containing their derision. Second Strategist Carr scoffed loudly, his ridge crests inflating mockingly. Perhaps they wished to beg for mercy personally. He chortled even Vuler. The composed First Strategist allowed a subtle ripple of his mouth, tentacles showing his amusement. Admiral Thuler, however, felt a faint unease curl within his mind. Something about this felt wrong. There was a confidence in the way the ship approached a calm that did not fit the actions of a desperate delegation expecting annihilation. No escort, no visible weapon emplacements, no overt shields. It was absurd on the surface, but Thuler had not risen to admiral by ignoring his instincts. Magnify the vessel, he commanded, and the tactical holograms adjusted, enlarging the human ship for closer inspection to all appearances. It was an unarmed diplomatic cruiser, lightly armored with basic defense systems, exactly the type of vessel that would be used for non-combat missions. Thuler examined the readouts more closely. Minimal energy emissions, standard sublight engines, no evidence of high yield weaponry or defensive countermeasures still. That creeping sense of dread gnawed at him. Commander Chen was transmitting again. The communications officer reported hesitation coloring her voice. "Accept the transmission," Thuler ordered, tightening his arms behind his back. The main screen shifted, flickering before stabilizing on the image of the human commander. Commander Sarah Chen appeared composed, serene. Even her uniform was a simple dark blue bearing only modest insignias. Her eyes, however, burned with a sharp, focused intensity that spoke volumes. "Admiral Thuler," she began, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency of a trained officer, "I am Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Confederacy vessel. Dialogue, I appreciate your willingness to establish this communication." Her tone was formal, polite, even, but beneath it lay an iron will. Thuler recognized immediately. "Commander Chen, you approach an invasion fleet with a single ship," he said, allowing disbelief to color his words. "I must assume you are here to surrender on behalf of your people." There was a pause, only a heartbeat, but enough to notice before Chen responded calmly. "No, Admiral. I bring a different message, a chance for you to reconsider your course of action and withdraw before irreversible damage occurs." The bridge erupted in laughter, officers slapping the sides of their control stations in disbelief. Vular turned to Thuler with a sarcastic gleam in his eyes. "The humans truly have no understanding of the situation," he muttered. But Thuler kept his focus squarely on the human commander. Chen continued, unperturbed. "We are aware of the size and strength of your coalition fleet. We have monitored your preparations for some time. We allowed your buildup to proceed so that we could fully understand the extent of the threat you posed." Thuler felt his stomach tighten. "You speak as if humanity had any choice in the matter," he snapped, trying to reassert control. Chen met his gaze evenly. "We did, Admiral, just as we have a choice now. We prefer to resolve conflicts without unnecessary bloodshed, but we are prepared to defend ourselves by whatever means necessary." Her words were spoken without arrogance, without anger, just a cold, factual certainty that cut through the bravado of the bridge crew like a blade. "With your permission," Admiral Chen said, gesturing off-screen, "I would like to provide a brief demonstration of why an attack on humanity would be ill-advised." Thuler hesitated, pride warring with caution. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, that this was not the desperate plea for mercy. It appeared to be. "Very well," he said, "show us what you will." Commander Chen nodded once. "Tactical officer, prepare to monitor all sectors," he ordered warily. Suddenly, the tactical display shifted. Commander Chen directed their attention specifically to Sector 912, where a formation of Vacay destroyers maintained the forward perimeter. Hundreds of ships, all heavily armed, all crewed by the elite of the coalition navies. Yet within seconds, alarms began blaring across the bridge. Dozens of ships spontaneously erupted into flame without warning, explosions tearing them apart from within the once orderly formation, disintegrated into chaos. Officers shouted data at Thuler, but it made little difference. The fleet was crumbling in real time. Commander Chen spoke again, her voice steady. The Vaque destroyers utilized a new quantum drive system. We identified critical vulnerabilities within that design, vulnerabilities that allow catastrophic failures when exposed to certain subspace frequency modulations. Another wave of explosions lit up the screen, this time among the Dandri City ships, massive vessels shuddering violently before collapsing in on themselves. The Coalition fleet, their pride, their ultimate show of strength, was unraveling without a single shot fired from the human vessel. Admiral Thuler clenched his fists, watching helplessly as reports flooded in reactor failures, navigational disruptions, structural destabilizations, all seemingly spontaneous and all devastating. Chen leaned slightly closer to the camera for emphasis. This is only a sample. Admiral, every class of vessel represented in your armada contains similar vulnerabilities, some physical, some digital, some based on fundamental errors. In your scientific models, errors we have known about for decades. Your people were never as careful as you believed. Vular turned to Thuler, pale beneath his blue skin. We are losing the fleet, Admiral, he whispered. The humans are dismantling us, and we cannot even see. How Thuler gritted his mandibles together, swallowing the bitter taste of humiliation. It was not just defeat that loomed before them, but complete and utter exposure. Humanity had not simply prepared for open war. They had prepared to annihilate the Coalition from within, without ever needing to meet force with force. Chen waited patiently for a response, offering the smallest of mercies in her silence. Thuler stared at the ever-growing list of casualties flashing across the tactical screen. The fleet that was supposed to symbolize their dominance was disintegrating, and humanity had not yet fired a single shot. Commander Sarah Chen stood firm on the screen, her expression calm and composed, as the Kraken bridge officers struggled to process the chaos unfolding on their tactical displays. She waited, letting the weight of the destruction settle over them before speaking again. Admiral Thuler gritted his mandibles as he forced himself to meet her gaze. The arrogance he had expected from the humans was nowhere to be seen, replaced instead by something colder and more unnerving, a confidence born not of desperation but of careful calculation. Chen spoke clearly, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Admiral, the fleet you see crumbling before you is only the beginning. Every vessel in your Coalition fleet, every ship, every platform has been compromised. To varying degrees, vulnerabilities exist that we have mapped and understood for some time now. Some are rooted in the physical design of your ships, others in the software architectures you adopted. Still others stem from fundamental misunderstandings of physics that your scientists have incorporated into your core technologies. Thuler struggled to absorb the magnitude of what she was saying. If what she claimed was true, then the entire alliance, the culmination of decades of preparation, was at the mercy of a power they had severely underestimated. Across the bridge, the laughter and mockery had vanished, replaced by frantic activity and muted horror. Chen continued, her voice never rising, never betraying anything but quiet certainty. I am not here to threaten you, Admiral. I am here to give you a choice. Withdraw now and preserve what you can of your forces and your civilizations, or continue this path and face a complete dismantling of your military power. It is not a threat. It is an inevitability. Vular leaned closer to Thuler, his voice low and urgent. Admiral, even if she is exaggerating, even if half of what she says is true, we are facing a collapse on a scale we cannot withstand. We must reconsider. Thuler's pride fought against the advice. His entire career had been built upon the belief in the superiority of the Kraken Directorate and its allies. The notion that humanity could bring such a force to its knees without even firing traditional weapons was an affront to everything he knew. and yet the evidence was undeniable. He watched the real-time feeds of his fleet breaking apart and felt a hollow despair growing inside him. Commander Chen continued speaking. "Admiral, our preference is peace. We have prepared for this scenario, not out of a desire to conquer, but because we recognized the inevitability of this confrontation. You see us as an upstart civilization, a disruptive force, but we see ourselves as part of a future that demands cooperation, not domination." Her words were sharp and direct, without flourish or embellishment. Her calmness was more terrifying than any threat could have been. There was no bluff, no desperate bargaining, only a statement of fact. Thuler glanced at the other coalition leaders displayed on adjacent screens, their faces a mirror of his own shock and dawning realization. None had been spared. Each species, each proud military tradition had been infiltrated and compromised without ever realizing it. The implications stretched far beyond the battlefield. It meant that humanity had understood galactic geopolitics at a level far deeper than any of them had. Credited, it meant that humanity had been patient, careful, and willing to wait until the moment was right to reveal their hand. The arrogance of the coalition, the assumption that the humans were merely fast-breeding innovators without discipline or foresight, had blinded them to the greater danger. Thuler forced himself to think pragmatically despite the roiling fury inside him if he ordered an attack. Now it was possible some human ships would be destroyed, but how many coalition vessels would be lost in return? How many homeworlds would be left defenseless to further sabotage and collapse? Chen watched him closely, sensing the battle within him. She said, "Admiral, I understand the difficulty of your position. I understand the weight of your duty. But duty also demands preservation. The choice is yours: withdraw and live to find a better path forward, or continue and be swept aside by forces you no longer control." She paused, letting the words linger. Thuler exhaled slowly, realizing that in this moment he held not only the fate of his fleet, but the fate of the coalition itself in his hands. Every instinct for survival told him the same truth. There could be no victory here, only varying degrees of defeat. If they fought on, their losses would be total. If they withdrew, they could preserve their strength and perhaps one day find a way to level the field again. The bridge remained silent, waiting on his command. He straightened himself, feeling the eyes of every officer upon him. "Commander Chen," he said, his voice rough, "you claim you desire peace. You claim you could destroy us utterly, and yet you give us a choice. Why should we believe you? Why not simply complete your demonstration and leave no enemies behind?" Chen tilted her head slightly, a gesture of understanding. "Because, Admiral," she said, simply, "we are not what your propaganda painted us to be. We are not conquerors, we are survivors and builders. We prefer coexistence to annihilation. We prefer a galaxy where different civilizations can thrive together rather than tear each other apart. It is in our nature to offer a choice, even when we hold the advantage, because the true strength of humanity, Admiral, is not our weapons or our technology. It is our capacity for mercy and for patience." Thuler swallowed the bitter taste of humility. Those words cut deeper than any weapon could have. A reminder that they had not just misjudged human capability, but human character. He turned to his first strategist, Vular, who nodded grimly. "There is no victory here, Admiral, only survival." Vular said. Thuler looked back at the screen, at the woman who, with nothing but knowledge, patience, and strategic foresight, had unraveled a force greater than any the galaxy had seen before. "Commander Chen," he said, "we will consider your terms." Chen inclined her head respectfully. "You have one standard hour, Admiral," she said. "We hope you choose wisely." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in heavy silence around Thuler. Officers began scrambling to stabilize the situation, but the Admiral remained still, lost in thought. He realized then that the war they had prepared for had never truly begun because humanity had already won it without ever needing to fire a shot. As the bridge crew of the inexorable Judgment scrambled to comprehend the unraveling disaster unfolding on their displays, Commander Chen remained poised, her face still illuminated on the main screen, while the coalition forces continued to fall into disarray. Explosions flickered across the tactical map sectors that had moments ago been solid and impenetrable, now showed gaping voids where ships had been reduced to debris. The Vakai destroyers, once the pride of the Vanguard, were annihilated in a cascade of reactor failures, chain reactions tearing through their formations. In moments, the Dandri City ships, immense and ponderous symbols of unbreakable strength, were succumbing as well, their defense grids blinking out their reactor cores, destabilizing as panic spread among the fleet. Commander Chen spoke again, her voice low, steady, and without malice. "Admiral Thuler, this is not an act of war, it is a warning. The systems you have trusted were built on foundations, compromised long before you assembled this fleet, some through subtle modifications in component supply chains, others through the dissemination of flawed scientific principles embedded into your educational institutions, and still others through simple psychological manipulation of your development priorities." She gestured off-screen again, instructing them to observe new sectors. Alarms blared as more ships began to fail. The crystalline battle platforms of the Zenith Collective shattered under the invisible assault, their once perfect structures fracturing like brittle glass. Some ships spun out of control, their guidance systems overridden. Others imploded as molecular destabilization turned their hulls into fragile shells. The scale of the disaster was breathtaking, and through it all, the dialogue remained, silent, still, and entirely uninvolved. No weapons fired, no energy emissions, no visible engagement. The human ship simply observed, allowing the coalition to destroy itself, with mechanisms they had sewn unknowingly into their own fleets. The bridge officers whispered among themselves, terrified, confused, betrayed at every level. The realization was sinking in. Humanity had not merely planned for war, they had planted the seeds of defeat decades ago and nurtured them patiently until the time was right. Commander Chen continued to speak, detailing the layers of the operation with a calm precision that belied the devastation her words caused. "Admiral, each subsystem exploited today has been thoroughly tested and verified over years of preparation. Each vulnerability mapped to cascading failures designed not to maximize loss of life, but to neutralize military threat with surgical precision." Thuler clenched his fists behind his back, rage and helplessness boiling within him. "You could have destroyed us already," he said, his voice low, cracking slightly with the strain. "Why reveal yourselves now?" Chen regarded him with a somber expression. "Because, Admiral, despite everything, we do not seek conquest. We seek security, peace, built on the knowledge that should anyone attempt to threaten our survival again, they would find themselves facing consequences they could not have foreseen. Humanity does not relish war. We prepare for it to avoid fighting it at all costs." Vular turned to Thuler, whispering urgently, "Admiral, the fleet is disintegrating. We have lost tactical cohesion. Homeworlds are beginning to report anomalies, defense grids, flickering command structures destabilizing. They have extended their reach far beyond the battlefield." Thuler felt as if the deck beneath him were tilting, threatening to throw him into the abyss. He realized now that every assumption, every strategy, every calculation had been based on a flawed understanding of humanity, their capacity for adaptation, their patience, their ingenuity had been catastrophically underestimated. Commander Chen allowed the silence to stretch, giving the coalition commanders time to absorb the depth of their defeat. Then she said, There are currently 17 other vessels similar to Dialogue, positioned throughout your territories, each capable of independent operation. Each prepared to enact similar demonstrations should hostilities continue. She gestured again, and the tactical map zoomed out, displaying the locations of these hidden ships, scattered among key sectors near coalition homeworlds' trade routes and critical infrastructures. They had been surrounded, infiltrated, and neutralized long before the first battle had ever been considered. Thuler looked to his strategists, his commanders, his officers. He saw despair in their eyes, a grim recognition that they had been outmaneuvered on a scale so vast it defied belief. The coalition had built the largest invasion force in galactic history, and yet it was humanity with a mere handful of silent ships that held the real power. Vuler whispered they were never preparing for a conventional war. They were preparing for an existential one. Chen spoke once more, offering no triumphant gloating, only a simple choice as before. Admiral, you have 1 hour to begin withdrawal, or we will continue the dismantling process. At that time, escalation protocols will be activated, and the outcomes will no longer be as controlled as they are now. Her voice softened, almost regretful. I sincerely hope it does not come to that. Thuler stared at the tactical display where the destruction continued sector by sector, ship by ship. His fleet, the pride of 7 civilizations, was dying without honor, without resistance, not through weakness of will, but through blindness to a new kind of warfare, a war waged in the shadows, in the code, in the very assumptions upon which galactic civilization had been built. He realized then that humanity had changed the nature of conflict forever, and that if they survived this day, it would be because humanity allowed it, not because they earned it. The bridge of the inexorable judgment fell into grim silence, save for the distant rumble of another detonating warship somewhere beyond the hull. Thuler closed his compound eyes, briefly steeling himself for the decision he had never imagined he would be forced to make. The humans had offered them a way out, a lifeline that spared what remained of their forces, and perhaps more importantly, spared their civilizations from annihilation. And yet accepting it meant acknowledging a defeat more total than any battlefield loss. It meant admitting that the coalition had been defeated, not by force but by intellect, patience, and vision superior to their own. It meant admitting that humanity had won a war that the coalition had not even realized had begun. The war that the coalition had prepared for was never the war humanity intended to fight. As the minutes passed, and more coalition ships collapsed under unseen forces, the true scope of humanity's strategy began to emerge. It was not a war of fleets or firepower. It was a war of systems, of vulnerabilities, exploited quietly over decades. While the coalition had boasted of ship counts and weapon calibrations, humanity had been embedding themselves into the very foundations of galactic infrastructure. Their influence spread invisibly through the arteries of trade, through academic research, through technological standardization processes that no one thought to question. Commander Chen had warned them, but seeing it unfold in real time drove the point home with brutal clarity. Communication relays flickered and went dark across the sectors. Navigation buoys began transmitting corrupted coordinates, sending coalition reinforcements into disarray. Planetary defense grids on homeworlds faltered their command codes, overridden from thousands of light years away. It was as if invisible hands were dismantling every safety net, every layer of protection the coalition had ever built. Commander Chen spoke again, her voice unwavering as she detailed the layers of the collapse. Your reliance on external development pipelines, your integration of open-source encryption protocols, your dependence on quantum drive technology that originated from research funded by human interests, all of these created opportunities we recognized and prepared for, not to dominate, but to ensure survival. Admiral Thuler stood frozen as reports poured in. Coalition colonies were losing contact with their governor's starbases, were broadcasting distress signals. Automated factories were shutting down, or worse, producing defective outputs that would cripple supply lines. The very economy of the coalition was beginning to unravel, not through blockades or bombardments, but through pre-seeded faults that no weapon could fix. Thuler approached him quietly, bearing a datapad, his expression grim. "Admiral," he said, "the Zenith Collective has already begun recalling its forces. They no longer trust the coalition. Structure to hold, we are fracturing internally." Thuler took the pad and reviewed the grim facts: defections, sabotage accusations between member species, threats of unilateral action to preserve home territories. The unity they had so carefully built over years was collapsing in mere minutes under the invisible assault. The human vessel Dialogue still sat quietly at the center of the storm, untouched, unimposing, yet absolutely untouchable. Every passing second made it clearer that to continue this engagement was not merely to risk defeat, but to guarantee annihilation of their civilizations, infrastructures. Commander Chen continued. Humanity had spent decades investing not just in weapons or warships, but in influence, in the quiet domination of ideas and systems. She revealed that every major innovation adopted by the coalition in the past century had traces of human involvement. Small technical standards shared through academic exchanges, seemingly harmless supply agreements forged through intermediaries, upgrades to critical military systems, manufactured in part with components built in Terran-aligned facilities. Each piece innocent on its own, but collectively forming an unbreakable web. Humanity had turned the coalition's own advancement into the seeds of their vulnerability, without the coalition ever realizing it. Chen paused, allowing the devastating realization to spread across the command decks of 1,000 coalition ships. "We did not come to destroy your cultures," Admiral Shi said. "We came to ensure they could never again threaten ours." The method was invisible, pervasive, and overwhelmingly effective. The war was already over before your fleets ever left your home ports. Thuler felt a cold, hollow ache settle deep within his core. The dream of galactic supremacy had blinded them. They had focused so much on military might that they had ignored the more dangerous battleground, the one fought with ideas, information, and trust, and humanity had dominated that war without firing a shot. The scale of defeat stretched beyond the immediate tactical losses. The coalition's faith in its own supremacy had been shattered. Their confidence in their technological edge had been revealed as a mirage. Their ability to wage war had been crippled, not by superior ships or stronger weapons, but by the silent erosion of their very foundations. Chen spoke one last time before giving them space to decide. "Humanity's power lies not in conquest, but in preparation. We have spent decades ensuring that if we were ever pushed to the brink, we would hold an advantage no matter how great the forces arrayed against us. We are not asking for surrender. We are offering a choice: survive and learn, or perish in pride. It is your decision, Admiral." The transmission cut, leaving the bridge in suffocating silence across the void. Coalition forces faltered without human ships, needing to engage a single enemy. Their warships became tombs adrift in space. Their communication networks became broken webs. Their strategic plans crumbled into dust without the enemy ever needing to reveal their full strength. Thuler turned slowly to the battered remnants of his command staff, each one wearing the same haunted expression. They had faced overwhelming military forces before. They had survived tactical disasters and political betrayals, but they had never before faced an enemy who had beaten them in every dimension. They had never imagined the true battlefield would be fought within their own systems, within their own assumptions, within their own pride. As more ships died without warning, as homeworlds fell dark, as the coalition tore itself apart from the inside, Thuler realized that the only path left was not to fight, not to resist, but to acknowledge the terrible truth. Humanity had won this war long before the first coalition warship had even left its dockyard. The war room aboard the inexorable Judgment had once been a place of confidence and command, where the leaders of the 7 coalition species had gathered to plot the swift defeat of humanity. Now it had descended into chaos. The walls vibrated slightly with distant explosions as another crippled ship detonated somewhere beyond the hull. The faces gathered around the massive holographic table reflected a spectrum of emotions: rage, disbelief, fear. Accusations flew back and forth. The Viri blaming the Dandri for security leaks. The Zenith Collective accusing the Ilra of technological negligence. Trust that had taken centuries to build was disintegrating in a matter of minutes. General Vexit of the Vri slammed his clawed hand against the table, his chitinous armor clicking sharply. "This is cowardice," he roared. "They sabotage us, they strike from the shadows, without honor, without declaration." High Coordinator Zol of the Dandri pulsed with angry red light, her translucent form almost vibrating. "3 of my city ships are complete losses, thousands dead, because we were too arrogant to see this coming." Thuler stood rigid at the head of the table, trying to maintain a semblance of order, as the coalition leadership fractured before his eyes. Even now, as the fleets collapsed around them, some still advocated for attack, others for negotiation. The common thread was desperation and fear. The coalition had been built on mutual interest, but that fragile alliance could not withstand the revelation that their enemies had been living inside their systems for decades. Commander Chen had destroyed more than their fleet. She had destroyed their sense of invulnerability. Admiral said, "First Strategist Vular quietly, we are running out of time. We have 28 minutes remaining before the human deadline expires. If we do not begin withdrawal now, further consequences are inevitable." The war room erupted into a fresh wave of argument. Several commanders demanded immediate retaliation, proposing a concentrated assault on the dialogue ship. Despite everything they clung to, the hope that brute force could still salvage something from the wreckage. But even as they spoke, the tactical displays surrounding them told a different story. Ships continued to fail across the sector. New reports indicated that planetary defense grids were collapsing across coalition homeworlds. Key military installations going dark without warning. The enemy had not only defeated them in space, they had crippled them at their very core. Pret Thorn of the Zenith Collective chimed in his crystalline voice. Chiming, perhaps they have exhausted their sabotage capabilities, perhaps. This is all they can do, and if we strike now, we may still achieve victory. Vular turned to him with an expression of weary disbelief. "Have you learned nothing? They prepared for this contingency. They prepared redundancies, fail, safes, automatic escalation protocols. If we attack now, we will trigger even greater destruction. The evidence is overwhelming." Thuler looked around the table. Seeing the grim truth reflected in most of their faces, humanity had not left them a viable military option. Even if the dialogue were destroyed, even if Commander Chen were killed, the mechanisms humanity had set in motion would continue operating independently. The galaxy itself had become the battlefield, and the coalition was losing without even understanding the rules. A communication officer hurried into the room. Breaking protocol, but no one reprimanded her admiral. She said breathlessly, "Commander Chen is requesting to address the coalition leadership directly." Thuler exchanged glances with Vular, then gave a grim nod, put her through the holographic display, shifted, and Commander Chen appeared above the table. Calm, collected, almost somber leaders of the coalition. She began, her voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "Before you make your final decision, I wish to offer you full understanding of the situation you face. You must recognize that the reach of our preparations extends beyond this fleet, beyond this battle." She gestured and the display split, showing images from across Coalition space power plants shutting down weapon platforms, failing defense grids, sputtering into silence. We did not simply plan for this engagement. We embedded ourselves within your civilizational infrastructure through economic influence, academic dissemination, and technological integration. You built your strength atop foundations you did not fully understand, and now those foundations are crumbling. It was not spoken with cruelty, there was no gloating, only a grim recital of facts. Chen continued, "You may attempt to resist, you may attempt to retaliate, but understand that any further aggression will only escalate the consequences. Autonomous systems are already active throughout your networks. Should you destroy this vessel or myself, you will not stop what has been set in motion." The implications sank into the room like a leaden weight. No one spoke for several long moments. The pride that had once defined the coalition was gone, replaced by cold, calculation survival instincts, slowly overriding. Wounded Honor Kev of Theat, the war philosopher known for his brutal pragmatism, finally stepped forward, his voice dry and ancient. "We must accept the reality before us," he said. "To attack would be to commit suicide. Our civilizations would not survive such recklessness." Thuler listened as the arguments faded into grim acceptance. The coalition had been defeated in spirit, if not yet fully in form. There was no unity left, no shared purpose, only fear and self-preservation. The dream of dominance over humanity had turned to ash in their mouths. Commander Chen spoke one final time, offering them a lifeline. "If you choose withdrawal, humanity is prepared to open diplomatic channels and negotiate a future built on mutual respect and transparency. If you choose to fight, there will be no further warnings." Her image faded, leaving the coalition leadership to their decision. Thuler looked around the war room, seeing his own resignation mirrored in the eyes of his peers. They had come to dominate and found themselves humbled. They had come to destroy, and instead were being offered mercy. Not because they deserved it, but because humanity chose to show it. His voice low but firm, Thuler made the only decision he could. "We will withdraw," he said. "Send the orders. Begin immediate retreat to coalition space across the war room." There was no celebration, no relief. Only the heavy, oppressive silence of defeat as the commanders dispersed to oversee the withdrawal. Thuler remained alone at the table, his thoughts dark and heavy. They had underestimated humanity in every way that mattered, and now they would pay the price for generations to come. The bridge of the inexorable judgment was cloaked in a heavy silence as Admiral Thuler watched the withdrawal orders ripple through the coalition fleet ships, once positioned for an overwhelming assault, now slowly began peeling away from their attack formations, engines flaring as they retreated toward their respective territories. Damage reports continued to flood in. Entire sectors of their forces crippled or lost, yet not a single human weapon had been fired. It was a defeat more absolute than any Thuler could have imagined, and it burned at the core of his pride. On the main display, the human vessel dialogue remained stationary, silent and unwavering, a reminder that the true battlefield had never been the one of ships and guns, but of patient strategy and unseen influence. Commander Chen requested communication again, and Thuler accepted it, knowing there was no use in posturing anymore. Her image flickered to life above the command deck, her face calm, almost empathetic. "Admiral Thuler," she said, "I want to commend your decision. It was not an easy one, but it was the right one for the preservation of your people." Thuler said nothing, his mandibles tightening slightly. Instead, he gestured for her to continue. Chen nodded the terms. We propose are straightforward. All coalition forces must complete withdrawal from human-claimed space within the next Standard Cycle A. Formal non-aggression pact will be signed, lasting no less than 50 standard years, during which time both parties will refrain from hostile actions or interference in each other's internal affairs. In addition, diplomatic channels will be established immediately to address legitimate grievances and foster cooperation. Her words were diplomatic, measured, designed to offer dignity even in defeat. Yet Thuler heard the underlying truth: they were being offered mercy, not because they had earned it, but because humanity chose to extend it. He found that even in the face of overwhelming loss, this reality was almost harder to bear than outright destruction, and yet survival required swallowing pride. Thuler inclined his head slightly, signaling reluctant agreement. The dialogue will remain to monitor compliance. Chen added, once withdrawal is verified, our diplomatic envoys will initiate contact. We hope to begin a new era, Admiral, one founded not on suspicion and conflict, but on mutual understanding and respect. Thuler could hardly suppress a bitter twist of his mouth. Tentacles' mutual respect built on the rubble of their ambitions, perhaps, but he knew better than to voice it aloud. There was too much at stake now. Every second spent clinging to wounded pride risked triggering the very destruction they were trying to avoid. The humans had made it clear they did not bluff, and they did not need to threaten open war. They simply waited for reality to assert itself. As Chen ended the transmission, Thuler turned to his officers and began issuing orders overseas. The retreat, ensure no further provocations, monitor our sectors carefully, and most importantly, do not engage the dialogue under any circumstances. His command staff responded with subdued nods. Gone was the swagger and confidence that had filled the bridge only hours before. Now they moved with the grim precision of those who understood that they stood on the edge of oblivion throughout the fleet. Similar scenes played out, ships damaged and battered, limping away from what had been expected to be a triumphant invasion force. Some commanders struggled to maintain discipline among their crews. Others simply focused on escape, hoping to reach the relative safety of coalition space before any further humiliations could befall them. Thuler stood at the center of it all, watching a dream unravel and wondering how they had been so blind for so long. He thought of the lectures at the academy that had dismissed humanity as little more than an upstart species of clever brutes. He thought of the treaties crafted in secret back rooms, the alliances forged in arrogance, the weapons built for wars they no longer knew how to fight. He thought of the centuries of coalition dominance now exposed as hollow pretenses built on brittle foundations. Humanity had not simply defeated them, they had redefined the nature of strength. The withdrawal was not without cost. Even as ships fled, many systems continued to report cascading failures: infrastructure collapses, communication blackouts, food shortages on remote colonies. The effects of humanity's unseen war would linger long after the fleets returned home. It would take decades, perhaps centuries, to fully purge the vulnerabilities humanity had exploited, if it could be done at all. In many ways, Thuler realized this was the true price of their defeat. They had lost more than ships. They had lost certainty, trust, and the myth of their own invulnerability as the final ships crossed the border back into coalition-controlled space. Commander Chen transmitted once more. Admiral Thuler, she said formally, the Terran Confederacy acknowledges your compliance. Our diplomatic delegation will contact your council. Within the next 2 standard cycles, we look forward to productive discussions and peaceful coexistence. There was a moment of silence, then her voice softened. I know this was not the outcome you envisioned, Admiral, nor the legacy you hope to leave, but understand this. Humanity does not seek the destruction of others. We seek survival, growth, and perhaps in time, genuine friendship. That possibility remains, if you choose it. Thuler watched her image fade, feeling the strange weight of her words settle over him. Genuine friendship even now, after everything she spoke of hope, not conquest after all the coalition had done, after all the contempt they had shown. Humanity had still extended a hand, not a sword. Perhaps it was a final insult, or perhaps it was the first step towards something neither side had dared to imagine. He did not know. Thuler turned away from the fading tactical displays and addressed his command crew. Quietly prepare the ship for return to the Directorate. We have much to repair and even more to reconsider. The inexorable judgment turned, slowly joining the procession of battered coalition vessels as they limped away from human space behind them. The dialogue remained a small, solitary sentinel against the vastness of the stars, a silent reminder that the galaxy had changed forever, and that the next time the coalition and humanity met, it would not be as enemies on a battlefield, but perhaps as equals at a table of diplomacy, if they could find the courage to accept the new reality that had been forced upon them as a last of the coalition ships disappeared into the distant void. Admiral Thuler remained standing at the edge of the command deck, staring into the stars beyond the shattered remains of his once proud fleet. The inexorable judgment moved slowly, its engines damaged but operational, carrying the weight of a defeat that would echo across the galaxy for generations. The dialogue remained behind a small, unassuming ship against the blackness of space, its very presence a monument to a new order. Humanity had changed the nature of conflict forever, and Thuler knew it was not simply their tactics or their technology that had won this confrontation. It was their patience, their foresight, their willingness to play a long game. While the coalition had focused on brute strength, on visible displays of power, humanity had quietly undermined their foundations, planting vulnerabilities deep within systems, protocols, and even ideas themselves. It had been a war waged in the shadows, and by the time the coalition realized it, they were already broken. The bridge crew moved quietly around him, repairing systems, coordinating retreat, managing the aftermath. But there was no sense of urgency, no drive to reclaim lost glory. There was only the slow, heavy grind of survival. Pride had been stripped away, leaving only the grim determination to endure and learn if they could. Thuler thought of Commander Chen, of the calm certainty with which she had laid bare the coalition's failures, offering mercy instead of annihilation, offering peace when destruction would have been easier for her. He wondered what drove humanity to extend that offer. What strange combination of hope, resilience, and pragmatism had shaped a species capable of defeating without hatred and dominating without cruelty. Perhaps it was something the coalition had never truly understood. Strength born not of superiority but of vulnerability, embraced a lesson learned through hardship and adaptation. Thuler realized that humanity's greatest weapon had not been sabotage or hidden technology, but a worldview that saw conflict as a failure, not a triumph, and survival as a foundation for something greater. He wondered how different the galaxy might have been if the coalition had understood that truth earlier, if they had sought cooperation instead of conquest, respect instead of domination. He wondered, too, if there was still time to change, if the offer humanity had extended was sincere, if peace could be built on the ruins of arrogance and mistrust. Vular approached him quietly, his voice low. "Admiral, the fleet is stabilizing. Most surviving ships have made it back across the border. Preliminary assessments estimate losses at 63%, with infrastructure failures compounding the situation on the homeworlds." Thuler absorbed the numbers without reaction. They were worse than he had expected, but not surprising. Humanity could have made it 100% if they had chosen, and the coalition would have been left helpless, unable even to plead for mercy. Yet humanity had stayed their hand. That fact above all others haunted him. The the dialogue has transmitted a final message. Vular continued offering condolences for the lives lost and reaffirming their desire to establish diplomatic channels. They will remain in the sector until confirmation of the coalition's withdrawal is complete. After that, they will return to Terran space. Thular nodded slowly, his mind already moving beyond the immediate crisis, beyond the anger and humiliation, toward the daunting task ahead. Rebuilding trust among the coalition species, rebuilding systems free from human influence, perhaps even more daunting, rebuilding their understanding of what true strength meant. He knew it would take more than new ships and new technologies. It would require a fundamental shift in thinking, a breaking of old habits of dominance and control, a willingness to see former enemies not as threats to be crushed, but as potential partners in a galaxy too vast and dangerous for endless conflict. He wondered if the coalition was capable of such change, if he himself was capable of it. The old ways were deeply ingrained, and the memory of this humiliation would fester in many hearts, breeding resentment and calls for vengeance. But vengeance against humanity would be suicide, and deep down even the most stubborn commanders knew it. As the inexorable judgment moved farther from the human borders, Thular allowed himself one final look at the dialogue, a tiny speck of metal and will that had humbled the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. A single ship, a single commander, a single message of strength through restraint. It was a lesson he would never forget, and one he would make sure his successors never forgot either. Humanity had not merely survived, they had reshaped the destiny of the stars, not with fire and fury, but with patience, precision, and an unshakable belief in their own future. As Thular turned away from the viewport, he carried that lesson with him, heavy and inescapable. The galaxy was no longer what it had been, and neither was he in the silence of the retreat. The first fragile seeds of understanding began to take root, seeds that might one day grow into something stronger than any armada, something enduring, built not on fear but on respect. If the coalition had the courage to nurture it, perhaps there was hope after all, not just for survival but for a future in which the mistakes of arrogance and short-sightedness would not be repeated. Perhaps the end of this conflict could truly mark the beginning of something better. And as the inexorable judgment disappeared into the swirling stars, Admiral Thular made a silent vow that if humanity was willing to meet them as equals, he would do everything in his power to ensure that the coalition would be ready to meet them with open hands instead of clenched fists. The defeat of the coalition by a single human vessel would be studied for centuries to come, not merely for the tactical brilliance it represented, but for the deeper truths it revealed about the nature of strength and survival across the galaxy. Historians, analysts, and leaders alike would struggle to understand how an empire built on centuries of dominance could crumble in the face of a quiet, patient strategy waged not with guns but with ideas and influence. Yet for those who lived through it, the lesson was clear. Arrogance had blinded them, pride had weakened them, and the assumption of superiority had left them vulnerable to a force that understood the battlefield far better than they did. The humans had not simply outgunned the coalition. They had outthought them, out-prepared them, and most critically outlasted them. It was a lesson as old as conflict itself, and yet one that every new generation seemed doomed to relearn at terrible cost. Admiral Thular, in the days and years following the withdrawal, would often reflect on the final message left by Commander Chen, a message that spoke not of conquest or domination, but of coexistence, of strength tempered by mercy, and of a future where former enemies could become partners if they dared to set aside their fears. He knew it would not be easy. Old wounds ran deep. Pride, once wounded, rarely healed cleanly, and the memory of defeat would haunt the coalition for generations. But he also understood that the alternative was far worse: to cling to hatred, to refuse to adapt, to seek revenge against a foe who had offered peace, would be to invite total ruin, not just for the coalition, but for every civilization that still believed in the outdated myths of unchallenged supremacy. Thulur realized that survival in this new era would require a fundamental change in mindset, a willingness to embrace humility, a commitment to rebuilding not just fleets and infrastructures, but philosophies and values. The coalition would have to learn to see strength not as the power to destroy, but as the wisdom to endure, to adapt, and to build. He thought often about how humanity had viewed the galaxy, not as a battlefield to conquer, but as a complex web of relationships to navigate and influence. They had seen the interconnectedness of economies, technologies, and cultures, and had understood that true power came not from dominating others, but from shaping the environment in which others made their decisions. It was a slow, invisible kind of power, patient and relentless, and it had proven far more effective than any armada could have ever been in the quiet moments aboard the inexorable Judgment. Thulur wondered what would have happened if the coalition had taken the time to understand humanity earlier, to study their history, their resilience, their strange combination of idealism and pragmatism. Perhaps they could have built alliances instead of hostilities. Perhaps they could have learned instead of dismissed. Perhaps this terrible defeat could have been avoided, but regrets could not change the past. Only actions could shape the future, and in that future, Thulur vowed the coalition would be different, or it would not survive. The lesson was brutal, but clear. Survival belonged not to the strongest or the most numerous, but to the most adaptable, to those willing to see the world as it was not as they wished it to be, to those who understood that true power lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the ability to transform. It was a lesson humanity had learned long before they reached the stars, forged in the fires of their own bloody history, a history of wars, revolutions, collapses, and rebirths, a history that taught them that the only true victory was building something that could endure beyond conflict, something that could grow and thrive even in the aftermath of defeat. As Thulur gazed out into the vast darkness of space, he saw not an end, but a beginning, a painful, necessary rebirth. If the coalition could take this lesson to heart, if they could abandon the illusions of invulnerability and embrace the hard work of adaptation, then perhaps there was hope that one day they could stand as equals with humanity, not in opposition, but in partnership. And if not, then they would fade into the obscurity of history, as so many empires had before them, consumed not by an external enemy, but by their own refusal to change the story of the coalition's defeat would be told and retold, not just as a warning, but as a beacon, a reminder that true greatness lies not in the might to crush others, but in the wisdom to lift them up. That peace is not weakness and mercy is not surrender, but that both require a courage far greater than war. And in the end, it would be remembered that a single, small human ship changed the fate of the galaxy not through violence, but through vision, and that the greatest battles are often the ones that are never fought at all.